Well, good afternoon and welcome to the homestead. My name is Jonathan. Thanks for joining us for this third episode of RBF Porch Talk. It is a beautiful day today, still pretty cold. I think it's gotten significantly colder from yesterday, but sunny, and I've tried to kind of put myself out here in the sun. So I think there's some sheep drama going on maybe over there, so sorry about that. Hopefully the camera's usually pretty good about filtering out background noise. Hopefully it's not annoying anybody. But excited for to get to just sit down and talk with you guys today. The title of today's Porch Talk is called The Path to Peace. And I want to really begin today asking you guys a pretty simple question, and that is this. If I were to sit down with you one-on-one, if we were just to pull up a rocking chair over here across from me on the porch, and I were just to say, hey, would you say that your life is just full of peace and rest, and even though you're diligently striving and working in your life, you would just say, I'm a peaceful person, I'm just at peace with the Lord, I'm at peace in my life, my life is generally stress-free, I'm just experiencing the fullness and the goodness of life? Would you be able to say that to me? Or would you just say, oh man, I'm just striving and I'm just working, but it seems like I never get anywhere, and I'm often stressed out and frustrated and disappointed, and I just can't, I spin my wheels and I just seem to never get anywhere, kind of like a hamster on a hamster wheel. Or maybe somewhere in between. Maybe there's some peaceful elements to your life, but that overall there's still a lot of chaos and strife and difficulty. And so today we're going to talk about that, and we're going to try to answer the question, is it really possible to experience peace in this life? And I think it's an interesting question because, the Bible's told us there will always be wars and rumor of wars, and so is it really possible for things to be peaceful? So we're going to answer that question. Before we do that, if you would take just a moment, if you've not already liked and subscribed and click the notification bell icon, we would just really appreciate you doing that. I'm really excited to share that we've had over 120 views of our first episode of Porch Talk for the spring. I'm just so thankful to be able to reach a good audience, and so the more of you that like and subscribe and share this link with others, then the more that it gets this information out. And so we appreciate you doing that. So let's talk about that peace. Is it possible in this life? Well, one thing that I want to say is we kind of define our terms today is that when I say the word peace, I'm not necessarily suggesting that peace is just everything always working out and everything is always calm and you're never hurried or in a rush to do anything, that you don't have problems and difficulties. I think what I'm talking about really is more of a state of mind. It's just a state of being. Are you just at peace, or are things peaceful? I mean, you might have to rush off to an appointment, or you might have to, have a very, busy 16-hour workday, or a busy work week. I'm not necessarily saying that we're all just sitting on the porch all the time, basking in the sunshine, just reflecting on all the dreams of things that we want to accomplish, and sipping on a nice freshly ground from the bean coffee. Sometimes when we think about peace, those are, at least for me, that's the visual that I get in my mind. But peace really goes much deeper, because you can have all of those things, and you can have a serene landscape and everything going your way, but not have peace in your heart. And so I think what we're talking about here is living in a way and having that state of mind that you just have this peace inside, that even if there is a storm going on around you, kind of thinking about Jesus and the disciples when they were on the sea and the storm was raging around them, and Jesus was just very relaxed and calm and asleep, and just knowing that ultimately he had power over the sea, and the disciples were frantic and they were upset and nervous and worrying about this and that, and the boat's taking on water, and are they going to survive? And then just Jesus gets up and calms the sea. And so many of us have a storm brewing inside of our life, inside of our heart. And so even if we experience some peaceful times in life, we're not able to fully embrace that and grasp that because we're just so stirred up and we're just so nervous and angry or discouraged, or we're just going from one task to the next task to the next to the next, and we just never really, for lack of a better term, stop to smell the flowers or stop to smell the roses, whatever the cliche is. So today I want to share with you, I do believe that you can experience peace. And I'm not just talking about moments of peacefulness, but I'm talking about a life of peace, a peaceful life. A life where both in a tangible way things are peaceful, and also a life where even though there might be a storm raging in your world, that you are experiencing peace on the inside. Both of those things I believe are possible. And no, I'm not just saying that because I'm transitioning to the empty nest and getting ready to have my first grandchild. And just, you might be saying, well, yeah, it's easy for you. You don't have 4-year-olds running through your house, running naked and wild, terrorizing everything. Well, believe me, I have experienced that. Having raised 5 children, I've experienced that a lot. And even then, even in what might, and I would probably agree with you, would be the most chaotic and crazy and wild time of life, that you can experience peace. But there are a set of decisions that I believe we have to make that place us or put us on what I call the path to peace, which again is our title for today's episode. So let's just take a little bit of time. Let's explore that together. And today we're going to be looking in the book of Exodus. So if you want to take a moment, turn your Bibles there. We're going to be looking at a very famous patriarch, and that is of the great man Moses. And we're going to be talking about his life. I believe that within the scriptures and through studying and understanding how God dealt with Moses, we can learn a lot about how he deals with us. And you might say, well, I'm not famous, I'm not special in any way like that. Well, if you'll recall, Moses also was not famous or really special in any way either, and yet God used him to do great things. And so we're going to be talking about his life, how that worked out, how he experienced peace, even though his life was one of the greatest adventure stories ever. From being the baby in the basket that goes to Pharaoh's daughter's house, to killing the Egyptian taskmaster, to experiencing God in the burning bush, to experiencing the plagues in Egypt, and parting the Red Sea, and leading the children of Israel through the wilderness and into the promised land. Just absolutely one of the wildest rides ever. And yet I believe that Moses was a man of peace. He was a man who experienced peace, and in his heart he had peace after going through some tough times, to say the least. And he too, in his life, ran from God's plan, not unlike Jonah. And the Lord found him and sought him out. And even though he was, as we understand, a poor communicator and not the greatest leader, God used him to be one of the most important communicators in history, and used him to do some of the most powerful things, and most of all used him in a powerful way through his redemptive work. So we're going to be exploring that and discovering that today. And as we do that, I want to just take a moment and begin to ask you to maybe, if you want to pause this, or if it's live, if you're watching it live, maybe just grab something to write on and just begin to jot some notes down. So one of the things that's been the most helpful to me to transitioning from a person of stress and hurry and just running around and trying to accomplish many things and trying to be efficient and a good steward and a good Christian and a good dad and a good parent, and a good husband, and just all the things, all the things that we all feel pressured to do. One of the things that really helped me when I began this journey, and it probably for me has been about an 11 or 12 year journey, probably started not long after about 2010, where I just really looked at my life and I thought, man, I am not living life. Life is living me. and I needed to regain some control, not in the sense that I wasn't surrendering to the Lord, but regain some control so that I was being purposeful and intentional in my life rather than just reacting to all the crazy things that are going on. And in 45 years, I'd have to say that there are still crazy things going on. And so, again, I think it's a poor expectation to think that you're going to somehow achieve in your life a set of circumstances that are just always peaceful. But rather, we have to exert that peacefulness on our life. And that's really one of the keys, I believe, to understanding that. And so in order to understand how to get from where I was to where I needed to be, and I would be a hypocrite if I just said, oh, I'm 100% there, I'm just living the most peaceful life, and in my world the sheep are always grazing peacefully. Well, not 3 or 4 days ago, I was running down that road chasing sheep who had escaped through the fence, and all heck was breaking loose. So by no means have I arrived at that place. But what I could say is that compared to where I was 12 years ago, my life is filled with a dramatically higher percentage of peace. And are there still kids doing wild things and lots of crazy stuff going on at church and in my life still all happening? Absolutely. But God has shown me through the wise counsel of others and through the scriptures and through living life how to be more aggressive and more purposeful in putting myself on that path of peace. So if you would, make some notes and begin to write down, what are the things in your life that you feel like are obstacles to being on a path of peace? What do you think? And there's not necessarily a right or wrong. These could be things that you're doing wrong that are keeping you in the land of chaos. These could be things that are completely outside of your control, that are just happening. You know, it could be something like a coworker that just really stresses you out, or a neighbor that's just constantly doing things. Maybe someone in your family. Maybe it's a loss that you've recently experienced that you're just really having trouble moving on, and you just feel upset and nervous. Maybe there's been a situation in your life. Maybe you have a life-threatening illness that you're struggling with, and that you are uncertain of what the future even holds, that perhaps you don't have very many days left. Whatever your situation is, and they're all very different. We all have different things. Now, in the sense that we're all human, and we all, I mean, nothing is uncommon. I mean, we all are in the world, and we struggle with things that humanity struggles with. But it's unique to us, and how they affect us is unique. And so just take a few moments. I really believe it'll be worth your time, and just jot down, or as we're talking, just begin to write down, what are those things that are obstacles? Because in identifying those things, it's going to help us know where to go from here. Well, let's take a look at Exodus. We're going to look at chapter 18, verses 1 through 8. And so I'm going to turn to that myself, give you guys just a second to do that. And the story starts off, which of course I would love to go through the entire book of Exodus and talk all about Moses' entire life, but I'm pretty sure that the viewership would fall off pretty steady throughout this video if we took 12 to 15 hours to do that. So we're going to pick things up late in the game, when Moses has already delivered the Israelites from slavery, and so many things have happened, and he gets a visit, and this is probably one of the most, I don't know, you might think one of the most insignificant stories about Moses. And of course, I think everything in the Bible is significant in some way. Maybe things are not as momentous or exciting as others, but this story really stuck out to me as I was thinking about what it means to be both a person of peace and to be on the path of peace. This story came to my mind, and so let's read it together and see if we can understand what's happening. Moses' father-in-law Jethro, the priest of Midian, heard about everything that God had done for Moses and his people Israel, and how the Lord had brought Moses out of Egypt. Now Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, had taken Zipporah, Moses' wife, after he had sent her back, along with her 2 sons, one of whom was named Gershom, because Moses had said, I have been a foreigner in a foreign land, and the other Eleazar, because he had said, the God of my father was my helper and delivered me from Pharaoh's sword. And Moses' father-in-law Jethro, along with Moses' wife and sons, came to him in the wilderness, where he was camped at the mountain of God. And he sent word to Moses, I, your father-in-law Jethro, am coming to you with your wife and 2 sons. So Moses went out to meet him, bowed down, and kissed him. And they asked each other how they had been and went into the tent. Moses recounted to his father-in-law all that the Lord had done to Pharaoh and the Egyptians for Israel's sake, all the hardships that confronted them on the way, and how the Lord delivered them. And Jethro rejoiced over all the good things that God had done for Israel when he rescued them from the power of the Egyptians. Praise the Lord, Jethro exclaimed, who rescued you from Pharaoh and the power of the Egyptians and snatched the people from the power of the Egyptians. Now I know that Yahweh is greater than all gods, because he did wonders when the Egyptians acted arrogantly against Israel. Then Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, brought a burnt offering and sacrifices to God, and Aaron came with all the elders of Israel to meet and eat a meal with Moses' father-in-law in God's presence. The next day Moses sat down to judge the people, and they stood around Moses from morning until evening. When Moses' father-in-law saw everything he was doing for them, he asked, What is this thing that you're doing for the people? Why are you alone sitting as judge, while all the people stand around you from morning until evening? Well, the first thing that really is fascinating to me is that here's the guy. I mean, at this point, he is famous. He's led the Israelites out of slavery. God's used him to perform miracles, part the Red Sea. They followed this pillar of fire. I mean, so many amazing things had happened. And yet Moses pauses to submit himself to wise counsel from his father-in-law, who was a priest from Midian, which, if you'll recall, that's the place that Moses fled to after he killed the Egyptian taskmaster, and he kind of went out to a faraway place. That's where he fled, and that's where he started a family and kind of started his life. And then it wasn't like he just set out to do all these great things when he was 20. And God was at work for decades doing things and working in his life before he was ready to fulfill the task that God had for him. But after all of this, after all of these amazing things, he didn't think of himself as, well, I know everything. And even though God had clearly used him to do great things, he didn't assume that he was just going to continue to make wise decisions and do great things. So he submitted himself to wise counsel. And I want to encourage you today that I believe that many of us suffer from our own foolishness because we fail to gain and seek out wise counsel in our lives. If you're a woman, I believe that you should be seeking wise counsel from an older woman. If you're a man, I believe that you should be seeking wise counsel from an older man, and not just once a week or once a month or just one person, but just constantly be putting yourselves in fellowship with other godly people, and even if in your job there's no one else who's a believer there, but in the times that you are away from that job or away from that responsibility that you have, maybe you're a stay-at-home mom, and so you're not around any people. You're just around little wild childs all day. But you've got to be very intentional. It doesn't just happen on accident. You've got to be intentional about putting godly people in your life and around them. This applies to our kids as well, not just us. We've got to make sure that our kids are in an educational environment, or in a place, in a church, and having a time of fellowship where there are believers that are going to be there to encourage them. And I see the camera kind of wobbling and the wind's blowing, so I apologize for that. I hope we don't make anyone seasick. I don't think it's so bad that you're getting seasick, but I can definitely see that thing blowing, and unfortunately I don't have a lot of control over the wind right now, so we might just have to live with that. So in this story now, Moses is going to, kind of like many of us, experience what it's like to have a father-in-law, when your father-in-law is kind of looking at what you're doing and saying, I think there's probably a better way to do this, a more effective way to do this. And what he was referring to here is that Moses had, because, they had left a civilization and a government and a sense of law and order, they had left that, and now you just have this massive nation-sized group of people, but with really no laws other than the laws that God gave. But as far as the practical thing, like, he stole my lamb, or he, whatever it was, someone where arbitration is needed, Moses had taken it upon himself just to do everything. And so he was spending day and night while people stood in a very, very long line, trying to make it right. And he probably had the same kind of thoughts and feelings that we do. As, oh, nobody can do it as good as me, or no one else should have to take the time to do this. It's my responsibility. God's called me to be the leader, and so I need to lead, and all these thoughts that we often have. And so we take upon ourselves a heavy burden. And that's really the first thing that I want for us to begin to camp on. And I want to ask you, have you taken on a heavy burden in your life? Because for many of us, and we know from the scriptures, Jesus said, my yoke is easy and my burden is light. So if you are carrying a heavy burden, then that means that you have elected to carry that burden, because Jesus has told us to cast our cares upon him, to cast our burdens upon him. So don't misunderstand me. I'm not saying you should just quit everything in life and just come sit on the porch. And by no means am I saying that. And really by no means is that possible for any one of us, unless you're just extremely wealthy and you can just, do that. But for the 99% of us that can't, we've got to go out into the world, and we have responsibilities. We've got things that we need to do. So that's not what I'm saying, but I am talking about living your life in such a way that you are not over encumbered or overburdened with so many responsibilities and stresses and things that are just crushing you in your life. And I would have to be honest, one of the ways that I was inspired to share this with you today is because I have been talking with a number of people over the last several weeks in my ministry as associate pastor at River Bluff Fellowship that have just shared with me that their burden is just so heavy, and that they are just getting crushed under the weight of that. And so it's kind of gotten me thinking, like, man, this is something that we're all really struggling with. And as life becomes more fast-paced and more complicated, the things that can get piled on are just higher and higher and higher and higher. And so we just have to take a moment to recognize that and realize that. And so today, I guess as we get into this story, what I want to begin to ask you to do is maybe just stop for a moment. It'd be kind of like if I'm just standing on the street corner, I'm sharing this message, and you just kind of walked up and you got your giant backpack just full of stuff from your life, and you 5 times the size of you, and you got it strapped to it. But maybe as you're standing there listening, maybe just take those straps down, set that burden on the ground for just a moment, and just enjoy the feeling of not carrying that. And while you're doing that, let's take a minute before you pick that burden back up, and let's decide if all the things that are in that backpack, okay, or bug out bag if you're a little more on the survivally prepper side like me, whatever you're carrying, whatever you've got in that backpack, let's just think for a minute and begin to ask ourselves, do I need everything in there? And maybe let's start taking some of those items out of our backpack, and let's just do an inventory. And as you're making your list, as you're writing down the obstacles for peace in your life, maybe some of the things that you're carrying in that backpack are obstacles. Maybe it's the way that you're parenting. Maybe it's the way that you're thinking about a situation. Maybe you've taken on too many responsibilities and too many commitments, both good or bad. Maybe you're using substances like alcohol or drugs or medications or herbs or something to make you feel better instead of dealing with the situations and difficulties in life. Whatever it is, let's just begin to take an inventory of all these things that are in this really big and heavy backpack that we're carrying around. Let's continue on in our story. Let's see what wise counsel Moses' father-in-law gives him. Moses replied to his father-in-law. We're in verse 15 of Exodus 18 if you're just joining us. because the people come to me to inquire of God. And whenever they have a dispute, it comes to me, and I make a decision between one man and another, and I teach them God's statutes and laws. What you're doing is not good, Moses' father-in-law said to him. Well, I'm sure that if you have a father-in-law, you've probably heard those words. And I know that from my experience, my father-in-law is always trying to be helpful. He's not ever trying to condemn me or make me feel bad, but he's just trying to say, hey, there's a better way to do what you're doing. I can remember the first time when we first started farming, or I guess ranching, more technically correct, and we started raising some cows, and it was time to work them, and so we got them up in the corral, and I'd kind of designed the corral just with what I had, and we'd bought a chute and some different things, and I didn't really have a good system to get them gathered up to go through the alley. And so we'd be out there, and he came out to kind of help us and show us how to give vaccinations and do all the different things that you got to do when you work cows. And I can remember we were just chasing cows around in a circle, and it just took forever, and Stephanie's out there working, the kids were out there working, we're all just chasing these cows around, and it was pretty comical. I'm glad that YouTube wasn't really a thing back then, because I'm sure it could have ended up on YouTube so people could just make fun of how little we knew about actually ranching. And anyway, so after all that, my father-in-law was just kind of gently later, it's like, well, there's probably a better way to design and organize this working area or this working facility so that you can get them caught easier, and so that by the time you actually get to the giving vaccinations and things, you're not completely exhausted and covered in mud, so where you can do that a little bit easier. And that's probably a good word picture for many of us in our life, that there's probably a lot of things that we're doing, and we're just not very efficient, and we're maybe just not doing it in a way that's either correct morally, or that we've just invested our time in the wrong kind of things, and we're just spinning our wheels trying to get from point A to point B, but never really leaving point A because we don't have a good design, we don't have a good plan, we don't have clear calling from the Lord and direction on the Lord, and maybe we've gotten out in front of Him, or maybe we've just slothfully been sitting back and God's been prodding us and moving us, and we just have not been faithful in the things that He's called us to do. So his father-in-law goes on in verse 17, or in verse 18, he says, "You will certainly wear out both yourself and these people who are with you, because the task is too heavy for you." And I would say to some of you today that the task that you have taken on in your life, it's too heavy for you. And that doesn't mean that the task is actually too heavy for you to handle, but it means that in your current state of mind and in your current spiritual walk, that you do not have the capacity. It's kind of like, let's say maybe you can lift 300 pounds, but you're carrying 450 pounds around, and it is breaking your back. And so he gives this word of wise counsel. He says, you can't do it alone. Now listen to me. I will give you some advice, and God be with you. You be the one to represent the people before God and bring their cases to Him. Instruct them about the statutes and laws, and teach them the way to live and what they must do. But you should select from all the people able men, God-fearing, trustworthy, hating bribes, and place them over the people as commanders of thousands, hundreds, fifties, and tens. So Moses' father-in-law, Jethro, gives him some great advice. He said, gain others to share the burden with you, the burden of leadership. Not just anybody, but there are qualifications. So that's just like in your life. You can't just start doing stuff. You've got to learn how to do it effectively, and you've got to practice it and make sure that when you're ready to take that jump or to do whatever it is that God's put on your heart to do, that you're ready to do it. And I know many of us, we're not ready to be parents. I mean, I don't even know what that would mean. I don't even know if you can be ready to be a parent. You pretty well just have to jump out of the airplane and learn to parachute, and learn to hang on and fly down as you're going to the ground. There are many things in life that we're not prepared for. We're not prepared to fight cancer. We're not prepared to lose our job and go through times of economic hardship. I mean, just this past couple years, when we as in the government has printed 40%. We've deflated the currency by 40%. I mean, it's just almost outright theft from the people in devaluing the currency. That it is very difficult financially. I mean, as we've discussed in other episodes, and there are just many things like that that are by and large outside of our control that put a heavier and heavier burden on ourselves. And so we've got to learn how to take this advice. Perhaps today this is kind of like Moses' father-in-law coming to you and saying, the burden you're carrying is just too much. It's just too heavy. And you've got to take that backpack off and you've got to lay it down before the Lord. And you've got to understand which things you are to carry and which things you are to let him carry. And that's not always easy to understand and identify, but hopefully by now, even if you've not started making a handwritten list, you've just been taking that mental inventory of things in your life that right now are just really, really a problem. And what we want to do now is to begin to take those things and walk in a direction and on a path that's going to help us to carry a lighter burden. And what I want to share with you, I've got a list of some things as I was thinking through this story. And I was thinking about my own personal path to peace, things that have helped me to move forward with that. I'd like to share them with you. And the first one, there are 10 of them. So this is quite the list. So you may want to write this down, or if you have a really great memory, I guess, just go for it. The first item is you really can't move forward in this process without yielding yourself to the Lord. And what I mean by that is all of the things in your life that are priorities for you, that you prioritize in a certain way, you're going to just have to lay those things down. The second thing is to seek wise counselors. And so once you have settled into yourself that you are going to live your life God's way, you're going to carry the burdens that he has for you, then you've got to seek out people in your life that will help you walk through that. And that's not to say that you're dumb. I mean, that's not why we get wise counsel. We get wise counsel is that because we can't think of everything. And sometimes we get tunnel vision and we have a hard time seeing the macro view of our life. And a wise counselor can help us see that. But just make sure that they have the qualifications like the people in Israel did, that were trustworthy and dependable and responsible and that had a proven track record of godliness that can help you. And we're going to just quickly go through these. I apologize, my battery on my iPad's really low, and I don't have these memorized, so I may just get them out there and then we'll talk about them in more detail in just a moment. Number 3 is assess where strife is emanating in your life. So find that source, find that place that strife is coming from, because in a little bit we're going to go in and we're going to kind of put the cap on that leak. Number 4, make preparations for the journey. I mean, once we know where we're going, we've got to get ready to get there. Number 5, count the cost and determine what is getting left behind. One of the things that is a cold hard truth about this journey is that you can't take everything. You know, if you moved right now to Iceland, you just can't take your giant leather sofa with you. There are going to be things that you have to leave behind, or that you have to sell and convert that into Bitcoin or something that's easily transferable, so that you can use that value of whatever that thing was when you get there. But we've got to decide what gets left behind on the ground and what we're moving forward with. Number 6, and this is the hard part that everybody gets stuck on, is we have to actually make the journey. You know, we can do all the preparing and thinking about it and dreaming, but at some point you just got to go. Ready or not, it's time to go. And so you've got to have the courage and the determination to do that. Number 7, there's going to be pitfalls. We've got to avoid the pitfalls. And there are going to be, I mean, it's just like walking through a sheep doo-doo minefield out here, that if you've got really nice shoes on, you're going to have to be very careful where you step, or else you will get off the path, or you will step on a landmine and blow yourself up. Number 8, you got to build an altar. And we'll talk a little bit more about what that means, but along the way, I'm going to build some altars and some places of remembrance so we can see where we came from and where the Lord is taking us. 9, we got to set up shop. Once we're out, we're on the path, we're going, we've got to make sure that we have all the tools and the resources that we need to complete the journey. And lastly, number 10, never look back. The enemy likes to throw in our face all the mistakes that we've made, all the things that we've done wrong, all the wrong turns and twists and things, and rub them in our face and keep us in a place of feeling defeated, feeling like we just can't keep going. And so we have to make sure and just not look back, you know, and just like Sarah in the story where she looked back and got turned into a pillar of salt. God told her, don't look back. I'm going to destroy the city. That for many of us, we have a hard time with that. We have a hard time of dwelling on the past. And there is a healthy way of dwelling on the past. And that healthy way is to look to the past in a historical sense so that we can look at the mistakes that were made and learn from them and do better in the future. But if we're constantly dwelling and living in the land of regret and anxiety and anxiousness, we will have a hard time moving forward and living a life of peace. So let's take some of these things apart. Now that we've got them all out there, I think they're fresh enough in my mind where I won't have to look down so much at my notes. But let's just take a moment and let's just talk about this journey. One of the things that I think is difficult, and I guess for me, what was the most difficult is deciding what I couldn't take on the journey. I know that many of us we are just doers, you know. In fact, I think Christians generally, once they feel the call of Christ on their life and God gives you purpose and meaning and direction, I mean, we're running the race, and we're just trying to grab everything we can and do everything we can do, and we're trying to do it in the right way, and we're trying to live a godly life, and we're trying to love our spouse and train up our children. You know, even though while I certainly admit that acknowledge there is original sin and that we're born into sin and that our flesh desires to sin, I also believe that people, especially those that have surrendered their life to Christ, they have a desire to do good. And even though we fail to do good all the time, I have just been so blessed in my life to know so many good, godly people. And in my 27-year journey in ministry, I have really learned that even though the church is flawed and people can be hypocritical or judgy, or it can be a hard place to maybe build relationships or get to know someone, I love the church. I love it in its imperfectness and its brokenness sometimes. I love it when it functions well, and I love it when it falters and doesn't function so well. I love the church, and I love the fellowship of believers, and I think it's just so important if you're going to be a person of peace. And especially for those of you who are introverts, I know that you don't just wake up every morning and think, wow, I just love to rush into a crowd of 100 people. But it is really good for all of us to check into, to embrace, to plug into it. It is kind of a power source. I mean, imagine the Holy Spirit is just this big power grid, and as you plug into it and as you plug others into it, and as you're all connected, that power, that current energizes us, and it gives us power to accomplish things. I really believe that if you are going to achieve peacefulness in your life, you're going to need other believers. You're going to need to plug into that group. And so if you're watching this today, and I know there's a number of you that are watching, you don't really have a church home, maybe you're not even sure about this whole Christian thing, but I want to challenge you to try to plug in somewhere, connect with somebody, because if you go out into the wilderness and on a journey by yourself, chances are something bigger and faster than you is going to eat you, and you're not going to complete that journey well. So we need one another. There really is strength and safety in numbers. Now, in Moses' case, the Israelites got together and they all did some bad things while he was up on Mount Sinai. So you have to be careful, again, how you plug in and who you plug in with. But all in all, I believe that the bride really is beautiful. To use a quote from Pastor Scott, make sure if you don't have a church home, or if you've been missing out on his sermon series on Sunday, you want to be here for that. It has just been so good. But I really believe that the bride is beautiful, and that we just have to be willing to have a multitude of counselors surround people in our life that are going to encourage us and influence us in the right way. But then going back to our list of things, we're just going to have to unpack some things. And even though we might feel like we're going to be more comfortable, if it's not God's plan for us to have those things on the journey, we've just got to let go of those things. And I don't know what those things are. Maybe it's materialism. Maybe it's certain things in your life that just bring you comfort, and you're just working and striving to keep these things propped up. And that it could be for a man. A lot of times it's having a home, or having cars to work on, or having a hobby that you love, or something that you just spend so much time and energy and expense keeping that up, that you're missing out. You're just stressed out and frustrated and discouraged and disappointed all the time, and you're missing out on what God really has for you. In fact, I was talking to a fellow pastor this morning that I just met. He was helping do some work on our house, and one of the things that we were talking about is how in our life, the things that God truly called us to do, even though they were often hard, the path was just so clear, and that miraculous things would happen, so that His will would be done in our life, and that we, even though we were striving and struggling, we really didn't have to do that in order for God to accomplish things through us. We just put those burdens on ourselves, and we made it hard on ourselves to do that. And a lot of times the struggling and striving were all for things that really were not an important part of God's plan in our life. And so that we had spent so much time struggling into where all the things that were God's plan, they had just lined up and they had just worked out. One of the things that I had shared was about when my wife and I had surrendered to a call to be church planners with the North American Mission Board for 7 years. I was kind of joking with him, but I was also halfway serious that I really was worried that I was taking a vow of poverty, that went from being in a large church with a great salary and great support from our church, and to just being kind of in the middle of nowhere in the wilderness, reaching lost people and people that didn't know about tithing or church attendance or being on mission or any of those things. And that even though it seemed like we were going to be living out of a van eating ramen noodles for every meal, God actually brought us into a season of greater prosperity than what we had before, when we perceived, quote unquote, that everything that we were financially secure. So we've got to make sure that as we take this journey to peace, that we are truly on. Wow, I can see that the camera is really moving. I'm sorry about that. It wasn't windy when I started this journey here over on this part of the porch, so I really apologize for that, and I really hope the wind noise isn't super bad. So in fact, I tell you what I'm going to do, at the risk of having us to pause for a second, I'm going to scoot up and out of the wind. And if nothing else, at least maybe the earthquake for you guys will stop, that the storm will calm. So after we are willing to select what's going on our journey with us, we've got to have the courage to make the journey. And as we're on that path, as we're on the journey, I think it's really important for us to build altars along the way. And when we see that happen in the Old Testament, especially when Abraham, who was before Moses, when he journeyed to the place that God was taking him, he would build altars to the Lord. And that did multiple things. For one, it acknowledged who was truly in charge of the journey, who the real leader was. And of course, that's the Lord, and that he was following him and trying to be faithful to his call and purpose. Another thing that an altar can serve as a reminder of where you were, where you are, and where you're going, to help us remind ourselves of the journey and the direction. And there are some of us that God gave us clear direction at some point in our life, but it's just kind of like we saw something, a mirage off in the distance, and so we got off the path and we chased after that thing. And now we've gotten lost off of the path. But we can see the Lord off in the distance. He's calling us back to the path. Now when we're on the road, we're on the path, we're striving, and we're dedicated, we're determined to get there, we have to be careful not to pick our burdens back up. And this is one that's really tough for me. I can lay my burden down for a day, for a week, and maybe for a month. But over time, sometimes that same sin or that same thing in my life that's an obstacle to God's path and his plan, that same thing, I want to just kind of pick it back up and stick it back on my back or in my backpack and try to carry that thing around. And then I get tired, and I'm worn out, and I'm just really having a hard time. And so a few practical things I think that are really helpful. One of those, as we talk about a lot on Porch Talk, is having a daily quiet time. If the Word of God and God's voice is constantly at work in your life, you will actually have a hard time getting off the path, because He will rebuke and correct you and put you where you need to be. Another practical thing that I think is helpful is that your state of mind in your life, it needs to begin with you in charge of and you spreading calm. Now, that's hard. I'm married. I've got 5 kids, and nobody in our household just wants to be high drama or strife, but things happen. Just you get a phone call early in the morning or late at night, or this or that happens, or there's something at church, we've got to run up there, or something goes wrong with the sheep or the farm. But I always try to just keep things, what I call chill. That even if, all of a sudden I've got this 5 things coming at me, these 5 things coming at me, I just try to be cool as a mountain of stream, even though bombs are falling and just chaos is raging. I just try to have a heart of peace. And I say to myself, every time I say this to me, I say, God's got it. Whatever it is, if I'm starting to feel a sense of panic and adrenaline starting to flow, I just say to myself, God's got this. He's going to handle this. And over the years, I've learned that not only is He going to handle the situation, that He is going to handle it in such a way that I'm going to learn something valuable, something that I can take away that's going to take me to an even greater state of inner peace and joy in my life. And another practical thing that will be helpful, I believe, for you on your journey, on your path to peace, is that you have to set aside dedicated time for actual peacefulness. And if you're a mom, if you're a dad, and you've got young kids, this is hard to do, because they are 24/7 and they always need something. And plus you got work on top of that, or responsibilities at home, or church on top of that. But you've got to have time where your spouse or friends take the burden from you completely, and you can go out into your yard, or out into the field, or to the library, or wherever you go that's just a peaceful place, the coffee shop, whatever that is. The ocean obviously probably is, but that's kind of hard to get to on a daily or weekly basis. But at the very least, once a week, you've got to have a few hours. I'd say at least 3 or 4 hours where someone else has got the kids, someone else has got your responsibility, and it's just you and the Lord, and you're just sitting there peacefully, you're reading, you're just being completely calm, and just having a time of peace. And you just got to dwell in that place and stay in that place, and even though you leave it and you go back into the fray of life, you take with you that time of stillness, that time of calm. And what's really amazing to me is that peacefulness really is catchy. You can, if you are a peaceful person in your home and in your workplace, and you demonstrate that with how you talk and walk and live, that will actually have an effect on people around you. Just as when they're going crazy and they're running around and all this stuff is going on, just as that can get you kind of hyped and amped, that very opposite thing can happen, and you can begin to be somebody who spreads peace and peacefulness all the places that you go. And so that's the challenge today, is to don't give up. Peacefulness is something that you can achieve. It begins with the Lord planting that seed in your heart, that you have that peace inside of you, and then you begin to take that peaceful truth and you begin to proactively spread it out, kind of like you would that cookie dough in your kitchen counter, but you spread it out into the world and into your life around you, and it will impact other people, and it will just bring a calming, lighter tone to your life. And as you give your burdens to the Lord, and as you begin to take this thing out of your bag, you take this thing out of your bag, and you begin to lay them all at the altar. You lay them before the feet of Christ, and you give him lordship over those things. You trust him with those things, and you just begin to take the responsibilities, the burden that he has that's light. I mean, there's going to be some burden. Remember, he didn't say, I'm going to take your entire burden, but he said that my yoke is easy, my burden is light. There's still a yoke. There's still work to be done, but that probably that work is going to be exactly what you can handle and exactly what you can do. And so I hope that's encouraging for you today. My prayer for you is that you would find a spirit of peace in your life. If you want to talk to me about this one-on-one, please feel free to leave a comment. Reach out to me on Facebook or on YouTube. I would be more than happy to talk with you more about this one-on-one. I believe of all the things in the Christian life that bring true life-changing meaning, this is one of the most significant things, is just finding that way of living your life in a very peaceful and serene and calm way. And there's nothing like having the calmness and the power of the Spirit of God in your heart, to where no matter what happens, you just stay in that place of serenity and trust. And it is achievable. I know few find it, it seems like, in this life, but God has a purpose and a plan for you. And a big part of that plan is just living that life and being that person of peace that God has called you to be. I hope all of you have a great day. We'll see you next Thursday at 4 p.m., praying that the Lord blesses you and gives you a spirit of peace today. Take care. We'll talk to you soon.